At the beginning of the 19th century, one man's name came above all in Europe: Napoleon Bonaparte. He was already the most celebrated commander in Europe after his glorious Italian campaign. The following year saw his rise to power as Consul of France, and by May 1804, he was the Emperor of the French. However, this would not be welcomed by the rest of Europe. Great Britain had been in a war with France since May 1803, and her Prime Minister William Pitt the Younger was putting a tremendous effort to form a new coalition against France. To succeed, he used his diplomatic abilities with mastery, along with the financial resources of his country. Although Napoleon tried to prevent it, he could not stop the Third Coalition from being formed. Tsar Alexander I of Russia was feeling uncomfortable with the growing strength and ambitions of the French Emperor. He allied with the British, as he was promised £1,250,000 for every 100,000 men he would raise. It was not only Alexander who disliked Napoleon. Francis II, the Austrian and the Holy Roman Emperor, was already seeking an opportunity to avenge his losses in previous wars. Having violated the Treaty of Lunéville's article of separation between France and Italy by crowning himself as King of Italy in Milan, in June 1805, Napoleon also announced the annexation of Genoa. With the participation of the Austrian Empire, the Third Coalition's main powers finally emerged. Sweden and Naples would be the supporting pieces of this alliance. On the day such a formidable alliance against him was being built, Napoleon's head was busy with planning the invasion of Britain. Since 1803, Napoleon had been drilling his army in the camp of Boulogne for his greatest enterprise. Yet, the mobilization of the Austrian army would force the French Emperor to change his plans. An army of 95,000 men led by Archduke Charles from Italy, another 70,000 men force nominally under the command of Archduke Ferdinand but in operation General Karl Mack von Leiberi from Germany, and a supporting force of Archduke John were posing a serious threat to Napoleon. He could not ignore the reality, so he abandoned the idea of invading Britain and turned his face to continental Europe. The War of the Third Coalition was begun. In the opening phase of the war, the coalition seemed the favorite. In addition to the planned main Austrian strike, they would attack from two more destinations to Napoleon's empire. One from the north, the other from the south. Nevertheless, things would not take place as they were drawn on the table in reality. The preparations for the joint assaults on Hanover and Italy went incredibly slow. Hence, it was the Austrian Empire at first hand to deal with Napoleon. In the summer of 1805, the only consul of the Austrian Empire chose their main theater of war as Italy. This decision was taken due to their previous experiences from the first two coalition wars, as both times the setbacks in the Italian front were their principal reason for defeat. They thought that Napoleon would again attack from here. The thing they did not know was that this time Napoleon would assail from the Rhine. 53-year-old Karl Mack von Leiberi was an experienced officer. He was the one who presented the report stating that the Austrian army was ready to fight the French. As the emperor's brother Archduke Charles was dismissed due to his reluctance for war, he was now the main commander of the Austrian army. That summer, he brought a new system of organization with 4 battalions out of 4 companies instead of the old one. However, the lack of time made it impossible for the Imperial Austrian army to get used to this new model. By contrast, Napoleon would try his new war machine called La Grande Armée for the first time. Implementing various military reforms in his army, Napoleon divided his main force into 8 corps. Corps mostly consisted of 15 to 30,000 men, and each of them had their own infantry, cavalry, artillery, and above all, their own staff. For the command of the corps, the emperor relied on his skilled subordinates. This system would provide Napoleon with a profound advantage of speed and flexibility. Different from the classical behavior of advancing in a strong but tighter and slower body, Napoleon could spread his corps to the different locations of the map. This would allow him to have a better sight and show a wider presence. If one of his corps was attacked, by Napoleon's own calculation, it would be able to fight alone for up to 24 hours, and meanwhile, the other corps would be able to consolidate in the field of action. La Grande Armée started their campaign on the 23rd of August, as Emperor Napoleon dictated orders to his corps to lay along the River Rhine. To keep an eye on Britain, he left Marshal Brune with a force of 30,000 men in the camp of Boulogne. Marshal Massena was ordered to defend Italy with his 50,000 men. General Saint-Cyr with the occupation of Naples with his 20,000 men. To hide his moves from the enemy, Napoleon banned all the French newspapers from writing a single word about the army. He also ordered his chief of staff, Marshal Berthier, to conduct an intelligence system about Mack's army. On the other hand, aware of the Bavarians' treacherous attitude against the Austrian Empire, Mack ordered a march on Ulm to subdue them. The Austrians were promised by Tsar Alexander to be supported by 2 armies up to 75,000 men in total. Both armies were to be commanded by experienced soldiers, General Kutuzov and General Buxhausen. As the Allied grand strategy required, Mack would hand over the command to Emperor Francis after the Russians joined him to start their invasion of France. Yet, for Mack, there was a second danger in addition to Napoleon's unexpected assault from the Rhine. The Austrians and the Russians were using different calendars. Tsar Alexander had promised his allies that Kutuzov's army would arrive on the 20th of October. But the Austrians, ignoring these differences in calendars, did not understand that the Russian army would actually arrive in Ulm at the beginning of November. By the end of September 1805, as the Bavarian army withdrew north without combat, Mack's army was holding the positions of Biberach, Stockach and Memmingen. On the other hand, Napoleon's Grande Armée had arrived at their primary destinations. On the 26th of September, the Emperor himself joined the army. He seemed dissatisfied with his army's march. The corps of La Grande Armée had serious difficulties with the quality of roads and continuous rain. Since the magazines were telling nothing about the army, the marshals had difficulties with the organization of logistics. Although Marshal Berthier stated that, in the war of invasion as the Emperor made, there would not be any magazines, but only the lists prepared by the marshals, the French general staff mostly failed to arrange the lists properly. Yet, Napoleon could not waste any time since he had to eliminate Mack before the Russian army's arrival. Hence, he kept giving orders for new positions. Supported by the Bavarian troops, Marshal Bernadotte's 1st Corps to Ingolstadt, 2nd Corps of General Marmont to Mannheim, Marshal Davout's 3rd Corps to Neuburg, Marshal Soult's 4th Corps to Donauwörth, 5th Corps led by Marshal Lannes to Günzburg, 6th Corps of Marshal Ney to Münster. On the road, Lannes and Ney would exchange their destinations. Such a gigantic involvement would certainly catch Mack's attention. So, to deceive and distract his foe, Napoleon ordered his cavalry reserves commander Marshal Murat to cover the army's movements with 3 cavalry divisions. The Austrian general staff was baited. Mack's subordinates convinced him that what they saw on the north of the Danube was mere feints, and Napoleon would assault from the Black Forest. So the Austrian general decided to hold the southern part of the Danube River. On the 6th of October, a division of the 4th Corps led by Dominic von Damm defeated the Austrian vanguard at Harburg. Hearing of this, the Austrian garrison of Donauwörth started to destruct the bridges. However, supported by Joachim Murat's cavalry, Soult's forces arrived in time and seized the city. Hearing this incident, Austrian General Kienmeyer had escaped towards the east. The next day, Napoleon arrived in Donauwörth, which was now his headquarters. He believed that Mack would try to break the encirclement by an attack on Lech section, so although they were already having so many hardships, he wanted his marshals to move even faster to prevent his enemy's escape. It was a common saying among the ranks of Grand Army nowadays that the Emperor invented a new way of fighting, using his soldiers' legs instead of bayonets. On October 8, Lannes and Murat made a joint attack on the isolated corps of Auffenberg and easily defeated them by taking at least 2,000 prisoners. The remnants of the Auffenberg's corps withdrew to Ulm. That day, Mack was urged by his staff to retreat towards Tyrol. But Mack had no intention of damaging his honor, and he planned simultaneous assaults on the French from different sides. However, his enemies were faster. One of Ney's divisions had attacked Günzburg. Although the Austrians destroyed the bridges to cut the French attack, Mack saw this as an opportunity to break the envelopment, so he ordered the repair of the bridges to start his own attack. Yet, this was a disastrous decision, and as soon as the bridges were repaired, the Austrians were defeated. Mack ordered a retreat to Ulm. After the Battle of Günzburg, Napoleon thought that Mack would retreat towards Tyrol. Therefore, except 3 of them, namely the 5th, the 6th and the reserve cavalry, he decided to concentrate his other corps to the east. While Bernadotte was ordered to march on Munich and take over the Bavarian government, the others would remain in Lech section. Napoleon himself would make Augsburg his new center of operations. Marshal Joachim Murat had been assigned as the temporary commander-in-chief on the Ulm section by the Emperor. Although he was a brilliant cavalry officer, this task would prove beyond his depth. On the 11th of October, with the intention of concentrating his forces to destroy Mack's army completely, he ordered Marshal Ney to move 2 of his 3 divisions to the southern bank of the Danube. Ney objected, stating that, in due course, General Dupont's division would be isolated from the rest of the army. Nevertheless, the lieutenant obeyed his senior. In fact, Murat's great error gave Mack an invaluable opportunity to escape from Napoleon's grasp. Very soon, 25,000 Austrians were attacking General Dupont's division of 5,000 men. Yet, Mack made a worse blunder than his foe. Due to Dupont's great command, he thought that he was facing an advance guard rather than an isolated division, so he fought excessively cautious. By nightfall, although suffering heavy casualties, Dupont had withdrawn along with thousands of Austrian prisoners and 8 guns. Mack again ordered a retreat towards Ulm. However, when he learned the fact that Dupont left his position and there was a gap between the French line, he thought to march on Ratisbon to converge Kutuzov. But this time, supported by Archduke Ferdinand, his subordinates convinced him to rest his army before marching. This disastrous decision would cause the Austrian army to starve since their supplies were about to end, and they lost their last chance to escape. As Mack was again in Ulm, Napoleon understood he was wrong with his prediction that the enemy would try to retreat towards Tyrol. Moreover, he got a letter from Marshal Bernadotte warning him that the Kutuzov's army was coming closer. This caused the emperor to worry, so he quickly ordered Davout's Third Corps to get closer to Bernadotte. Napoleon needed an urgent victory as he never did. He decided to take the command in person on Mack's side. To convince Mack to stay in Ulm for his devastating blow, he planted the Austrians with a false intelligence telling them that the British made a landing on France, and a coup took place in Paris by using the French prisoners and deserters. Mack and the Austrian staff believed in it, since it was a common narration among the captured French soldiers. On the 13th of October, Napoleon arrived in Pfaffenhofen. He paid harsh reprimands to both Murat and Ney for what happened at the Battle of Haslar-Jungingen. Then he immediately ordered Murat and Ney to crossing of the Danube for the relief of Dupont's division. On the 14th of October, at Elchingen, Ney found the bridges demolished and defended by 9,000 Austrians. The marshal quickly ordered the repair of the bridges, and then, like a thunderstorm, captured 2 enemy regiments. Following Ney's victory, Marshal Murat used his bridges and quickly crossed the river. He reached Dupont's position at a critical point, while General Vanek of the Austrians was launching a new attack on the French. Together with Dupont, Murat drove the Austrians away to Heidenheim. Meanwhile, on the southern bank of the river, consistent defeats, being trapped, hunger, and exhaustion were causing the sunk of the Austrian army's morale. Archduke Ferdinand, along with many subordinates of General Mack, had left the army to escape. Nevertheless, the dashing Murat would not allow most of the fugitives to find their way by capturing them on the road. Moreover, he would capture more than 20,000 men, including 200 officers and 120 guns. Already by the 17th of October, Mack was left without any hope. With General Marmont firing his guns from the north, and Marshal Soult marching to his south, he was assured that there was no way of breaking this encirclement. So he conditionally accepted the surrender if the Russian army did not arrive in 7 days. For these 7 days, he would open one of the gates of the city for the French. Napoleon already knew that the Russians were unable to save Mack. Moreover, as the Stuttgart gate was opened, Ney's corps started to steal the properties of the Austrian army. The Austrians were not having enough strength to do something against it. Finally, on the 20th of October, Mack decided to face Napoleon for his army's ultimate capitulation. This was a humiliating defeat for the Austrians. Mack's reputation was severely damaged. The French emperor was describing his opponent as poor and looking at him with pity. His rank would be stripped as he returned to Vienna, and he would be imprisoned with the conviction of dishonor. With the cost of insignificant losses, Napoleon had taken more than 60,000 prisoners and destroyed an entire enemy army before allowing one another to join it. By his own saying, he had beaten the Austrian army simply by marching. The Third Coalition, by the 6th month of the war, had taken a devastating blow. But still, the best was yet to come. Austerlitz. Gentlemen, we are not staying here. These words left the French Emperor Napoleon's mouth when he captured thousands of Austrians at Ulm. He was of course proud of his achievement, as he sent a wagon full of captured Austrian standards to Paris. Having eliminated Max Arm, the Emperor's new objective was to concentrate his forces on a march onto the Austrian capital Vienna. He assigned the recently arrived 7th Corps of Marshal Augereau to garrison the captured cities. Marshal Ney was sent to Tyrol to struggle with Archduke John. Lastly, a new corps was formed to march on the northern bank of the Danube, and its command was given to Marshal Mortier. The Allies, on the other hand, were shocked as they learned about the early and unexpected destruction of one of two big Austrian armies. Kutuzov had learned the news of capitulation by General Mack himself. The experienced Russian general knew that he could not fight Napoleon alone, so he began to retire. The Russian army had already marched hundreds of miles to converge the Austrians. The troops were exhausted, and their boots were torn. Yet, this was the only way to escape their destruction. Besides Kutuzov, General Buxhausen had arrived in Moravia to wait for his compatriots. While Archduke John was still in the control of Tyrol, his elder brother Archduke Charles was to prove the disappointment of the war for the Austrians. Charles did not intend to take the initiative, even though he had a clear numerical advantage. As a result, Marshal Massena was to cross the Adige. The two armies would face each other at the Second Battle of Caldiero, and the French would prevail. Archduke Charles, along with his brother John, would begin to retreat to unite their forces. On the 25th of October, Tsar Alexander of Russia met the Prussian King Frederick William III. It was a well-known fact that Frederick William was not fond of Napoleon. But the recent campaign of Ulm would bring the king's nerves to the climax, as Marshal Bernadotte had violated the Prussian neutrality by marching over Ansbach on his way to the south. The two monarchs made the Treaty of Potsdam, which compelled the Kingdom of Prussia to take a state of armed mediation to intervene in the war when needed. That same day, La Grande Armée began the second phase of the campaign. The initial goal was to catch Kutuzov. Yet, although some skirmishes took place, the Russian general was in a complete retreat by destroying every bridge to gain time against Napoleon. Having met the 18,000 men of General Kienmeyer, who escaped Napoleon's trap at Ulm by leaving Donauwörth at the beginning of the campaign, Kutuzov held a conference with the Austrian Emperor Francis on the 29th of October. They agreed on a compromise strategy, which meant Vienna would be left, and the priority would be the concentration of the Allied forces to get a numerical advantage against the French Emperor. Therefore, in addition to the upcoming Russian reinforcements, the two archdukes were ordered to march on the northern bank of the Danube. The next day, Emperor Napoleon arrived in Braunau. The city was full of arms and provisions, hence the emperor made it his new supply depot and continued his pursuit of Kutuzov. A small skirmish took place with the Russian rearguard commanded by Pyotr Bagration on the morrow. A division of Marshal Davout's 3rd Corps inflicted a defeat on a small Austrian army under the command of Count Mervelt on November 4, and the next day Murat and Lannes fought an inconclusive battle at Amstetten against Bagration. Although Davout inflicted a heavy defeat on Mervelt at Mariazell on the 8th of November, the French could not catch Kutuzov, and he was to cross the Danube the next day. Napoleon expected Joachim Murat to prevent Kutuzov from crossing the river. However, the marshal seemed impressed more by the idea of entering Vienna. Moreover, he even took Marshal Soult's fort and Marshal Lanz's 5th Corps along with himself. The emperor became furious when he heard the ill-considerate decision of his subordinate. "I cannot approve your manner of march," wrote the emperor to Murat. "You go on like a stunned fool, taking not the least notice of my orders." Even worse for Napoleon, on the morrow he would learn about the disastrous defeat of the Franco-Spanish fleet at Trafalgar by the British under the command of Lord Horatio Nelson. At the cost of his own life, the British admiral had virtually destroyed the enemy fleet without losing a single ship. Napoleon's reaction was simple: "I cannot be everywhere." Joachim Murat's decision to seize Vienna had provided a chance for the wily Russian general Mikhail Kutuzov to attack the isolated corps of Marshal Mortier. So, on the 11th of November, the Allied army attacked General Gazan's division. For the whole day, Gazan fought bravely, and Mortier organized the defense in person. The marshal was so hopeless that he even loaded the cannons onto the boats to send them to the other bank of the river. But at the most critical juncture, the hero of a similar fight at Jungingen, General Dupont, arrived with his men and saved Gazan's division from complete destruction. Nevertheless, Gazan had lost a considerable proportion of his army, and the Battle of Dünstein boosted the Allied army's morale significantly. As Kutuzov could not be beaten on the southern bank of the Danube, Napoleon devised a new scheme named the Maneuver of Hollabrunn. According to this plan, Murat would keep his march on Vienna along with the 4th and 5th Corps. Once he entered the city, he would cross the bridge there and make a frontal assault on Kutuzov. And meanwhile, supported by Mortier, Bernadotte would envelop the enemy. On November 12, Marshal Murat entered Vienna. The city was already evacuated by the Emperor Francis. The Austrian officials did not allow the state archives to fall into the hands of their enemy. However, they did not act the same way with the arms and provisions. After Braunau, the French found a rich source of campaign materials for the second time. Although the city was left to the French, the bridge was strongly defended by the Austrians. Nevertheless, Murat and Lannes, by courage, charisma, and cunning, had persuaded the enemy to allow their crossing, and the bridge was passed without a single loss of life. Following Marshal Murat, Napoleon entered the Austrian capital. People welcomed him with cheers. He assigned General Leclerc as the governor of the city, and that night he slept in Emperor Francis' Schönbrunn palace. Then he kept going with his envelopment of Kutuzov. Yet, this pretty nice starting operation would fail just as the previous one, since Marshal Bernadotte was too late to cross the Danube by milk. On the same day, Marshal Murat attacked the Russian rearguard of Bagration at Schöngraben. Murat could not analyze the situation well and thought that he was fighting the entire Russian army, so he made an armistice with the Russians. Hearing of this, Napoleon could not stop himself from berating his cavalry reserve's commander. "I am lost for words with which to express my discontent. You are only the commander of my advance guard, and you have no right to conclude an armistice without my order. You have thrown away the advantages of the entire campaign. Break the armistice instantly and attack the enemy." So did Murat. But Bagration was done with his mission perfectly, and the two Russian armies met under the overall command of Tsar Alexander. Napoleon had failed to force Kutuzov to fight alone. His Grand Army was too exhausted after a very long march, so the French Emperor had to give a forced pause to rest his troops at Brunn on the 20th of November. Napoleon saw that he was in a very precarious position. First of all, his line of communication was too much overextended. Secondly, the enemy had increased and would increase his numbers. Archduke Charles and Archduke John had met each other in Carinthia, and they were making their way to join the Allied army via Hungary. Meanwhile, Archduke Ferdinand was preparing to march on Moravia with a few fortunate fugitives of the disaster at Ulm. In addition to these Austrian reinforcements, another Russian force under the command of General Levin von Bennigsen was marching south from Poland. In such a circumstance, Napoleon thought of his options. If he advanced further, a Prussian intervention and the envelopment of La Grande Armée was quite possible. If he halted, then the enemy would get the awaited reinforcements, and he would have to face an enemy who enjoyed a vast numerical advantage. The best option seemed like a retreat. But by now his army was tired, and this would also mean an admit of defeat. The Emperor rejected all these three scenarios. He found his way with a bold plan that would force the Allies to fight before they got full in strength. Sending his marshals Murat, Lannes and Soult to the town of Austerlitz and the Pratzen Heights nearby with a force of 53,000 men in total, he caught the attention of the enemy, who reached 89,000 men in numbers. This move quickly showed its effect, and the voices started to rise in favor of giving an immediate battle in the Allied headquarters. However, Napoleon would do even more to convince his foe that he was too weak. On November 27, when the Austrian Emperor asked for a temporary armistice, Napoleon accepted it without hesitating. On the same day, he sent Count Savary to the Allied camp as his envoy to convey his view of the affairs, that he doesn't want to fight anymore and is in favor of an armistice. Tsar Alexander sent Count Dolgoruki to the French Emperor's camp on the 28th. And there too, Napoleon perfectly pretended as a weak and hopeless man. When he told Dolgoruki that he wanted a personal interview with the Russian Tsar, the Allied headquarters was divided in two. The first party was led by the Emperor Francis of Austria and General Mikhail Kutuzov, and those were still in favor of caution. When his opinion was asked on which position would be the best to fight Napoleon, Kutuzov's response was, "Wherever we will be able to join Bennigsen and the Prussians. The further we entice Napoleon, the weaker he will become, and the greater will be the distance that separates him from his reserves." However, since the leader of the second party, Tsar Alexander, who was in favor of an immediate battle, joined the army and took its lead, Kutuzov was only left as a nominal commander, and his thoughts did not have a value for the young and inexperienced Tsar and his subordinates. Tsar was seeking the glory of being the one who defeated Napoleon in a battle in which all the odds seemed in his favor. So the Allied army began moving forward to meet Napoleon. The tidings of the Allied movement were welcomed by Emperor Napoleon. To show Alexander and his subordinates that they made the correct move, he ordered his corps to leave Austerlitz and the Pratzen Heights and retire before a stream called Goldbach. He also ordered Bernadotte's 1st and Davout's 3rd Corps to join the main body as fast as possible. By now, most of the Allied commanders were sure of victory, as they remarked on Napoleon's ceding of the high ground as a reluctance to fight. On the 1st of December, Napoleon was finally seeing the enemy on the Pratzen Heights. The French Emperor set his headquarters on Suran Hill, where he could see the most of the field except his extreme right. He was aware of the fact that a mediocre victory would not work for his ultimate purpose of winning the war, and he needed a decisive victory to bring the coalition to heel. To ensure this decisive victory, as always, he needed to envelop the enemy army. But due to his foe's numerical advantage, this did not seem possible. But an astonishing scheme would force the Allies to play the game as Napoleon wanted. The French Emperor had deliberately left his right wing weak by covering the critical road of Vienna only with the division of Le Grand from the 4th Corps. Napoleon assumed that the idea of cutting his line of communication with Vienna would prevail in the Allied headquarters, and the enemy would attempt to envelop his army by leaving the Pratzen Heights in huge numbers. There, he would rely on Legrand's division and his youngest marshal Louis-Nicolas Davout, who was still on the road from Vienna to help the Allies. After he saw that most of the Allied troops were massed on his weak right wing, he would order Marshal Soult's 4th Corps to attack the Pratzen Heights. Meanwhile, 5th Corps of Marshal Lannes would extricate the right wing of the Allied army led by General Bagration. By the evening, although Bernadotte's 1st Corps arrived, there were no tidings about the 3rd Corps of Davout. Nevertheless, when Davout arrived in person before his corps and informed Napoleon that General Friant's division was now in Raigan and would be able to join tomorrow's fighting in the morning, the Emperor felt a respite. In darkness, he walked among the campfires of his soldiers and he talked to them. The morale of his army was extremely high. The soldiers were reminding him that tomorrow was the anniversary of his coronation and were promising to gift a great victory in honor of that. On the other hand, there was an obvious disunity among the Allied leaders. The assault plan was drawn by the Austrian Chief of Staff General Weyrother, who was eager to avenge Ulm from Napoleon. Just as his enemy hoped, Weyrother thought of enveloping Napoleon by attacking his weak right wing to cut his line of communication with Vienna. But most of the experienced Russian officers did not even pay attention to the Austrian general while he was enthusiastically talking about this plan. Furthermore, the language difference between the Allies would cause the late arrival of the battle orders to the most generals. The morning of December 2 was cold and misty, with more than 85,000 soldiers and 278 guns of the Allies against Napoleon's roughly 67,000 men and 139 cannons. General Friant was on his way to the French right wing at full speed, and this would increase the French numbers to nearly 74,000 men. But by the morning, the Emperor was assured that Gudin's division would be too late to participate in the battle. At 6 AM, he assembled a council with his marshals. The conversation lasted so long that when Napoleon learned the beginning of the Allied attack on Telnitz at 7 AM, he was still talking to his marshals. His first troops were the Allied advance guard led by General Kienmeyer of Austria. Napoleon ordered his marshals to attend their positions, and he started to watch the Allied movements with ultimate care. At 8 AM, General Doktorov's column left the Pratzen Heights to support Kienmeyer. After a short while, Le Grand was forced to retreat, and the Allies captured Telnitz. Meanwhile, General Langeron and General Przybishevsky launched another attack on Sokolnitz. At about 8:30 AM, they supported this attack with 30 guns, and this village was captured as well. The Allies were in control of both villages, but by now they had concentrated more than 40,000 men to their left to Napoleon's great satisfaction. Seeing that more and more enemy troops live in the Pratzen Heights, the Emperor asked Marshal Soult how much time he needed to take the heights. Soult's answer was 20 minutes. Napoleon replied, "Then we will wait a quarter of an hour more." About the time this conversation took place, Marshal Davout recaptured Telnitz by launching a counterattack. However, soon his forces would be sent back by the Allies. Even worse, some French regiments would shot each other while they were retreating in confusion. Nevertheless, the performance of the French right wing was well beyond Napoleon's expectations, and Davout had successfully drained the bulk of the troops on Pratzen Heights. As the mist started to fade, seeing that General Kolowrat and Miloradovich were also leaving the heights to support the attack, Napoleon ordered Marshal Soult to attack the Pratzen Heights. He also directed Marshal Bernadotte's First Corps to advance on Blasowitz to support Soult's attack. This assault caused a huge panic among the Allied commanders, and Kolowrat and Miloradovich had to make their way back to the heights. General Kutuzov ordered a part of the 2nd and 3rd columns to march on the heights. But Soult, thanks to the cavalry of his own corps, would delay their arrival. Although Marshal Bernadotte managed to capture Blasowitz, the intervention of the Russian Imperial Guard would send the French troops out of the settlements. While on the north, Lannes and Murat were advancing to extricate Bagration and Liechtenstein from the main zone of the battle. A cavalry attack of Liechtenstein would be barely stopped by the French, and Bagration's cannons were causing huge losses in Lannes' corps. Still, Lannes would manage to storm Blasowitz with bayonets, and as Murat concentrated his cuirassiers, Liechtenstein would be forced to retreat. For the rest of the day, Lannes would pin Bagration in a private fight, and not allow him to intervene in what's going on in the center. At 10 AM, the very division of General Louis Friant finally arrived on the French right. With the participation of Friant's division on the right, about 11,000 Frenchmen were facing 35,000 Allied troops. Davout quickly organized a new assault and captured Sokolnitz, before losing it to Langeron's forces again. Meanwhile, being pressed from 3 sides, Saint-Hilaire took the bold decision of making a bayonet charge on the center. This gave time to Marshal Soult to bring 12-pounders to the sector, and as Marshal himself organized the blasting of the enemy ranks, the Allied resistance was broken. By midday, the French Emperor moved his headquarters to Pratzen Heights. He ordered his center to encircle the Allied left, and pulled Bernadotte's First Corps to fill the gap in the center. By this time, Tsar Alexander's brother and the commander of the Russian Imperial Guard, Grand Duke Constantine, led his men on to the French. However, his attack on Vendôme was prematurely organized, and the concentrated fire of the French repulsed the infantry. Nevertheless, the ensuing cavalry charge struck the French 4th Line Regiment like thunder. They lost their eagle standard, and ironically fled before their emperor by shouting "Vive l'Empereur!" To remedy the elite Russian cavalry's charge, Napoleon sent his own guard cavalry along with the Mamelukes. The elite cavalry arm of both armies fought for nearly 15 minutes amidst a cloud of dust which made following the clash impossible by the narration of the eyewitnesses. In the end, the French were victorious. The Allied center now was completely broken, and the 2 emperors, along with General Kutuzov, had left the battlefield. General Buxtehude, who was reported drunk during the battle, could only now see his dangerous situation. With Davout attacking stronger and the French center coming to close the trap, he could only save a part of his men from being captured. Finally, when Bagration began his retreat at about 3 p.m., the Battle of the Three Emperors came to an end with a decisive victory for the French. Napoleon had taken the great victory he desired. By contrast, a total loss of about 9,000 men, he had inflicted 3 times more on the enemy and captured 180 guns and 50 standards. The next day, the two allied emperors talked over the next step they would take. But in addition to the disaster at Ulm, Austerlitz was too much for Emperor Francis' nerves. He wanted an interview with Napoleon. As this was accepted, the two emperors met each other on the 4th of December. An armistice was made between France and Austria. As the Russian army left the Austrian soil, the harsh Treaty of Pressburg was signed on the 26th of December, which would compel Austria to cede land and pay an indemnity of 40 million francs. Napoleon's destruction of the Third Coalition at Austerlitz frightened the Prussian king to take a further step against him. It also hastened the death of British Prime Minister William Pitt, who paid the greatest effort to form this coalition against the French Emperor. Austerlitz was Napoleon's greatest victory, and he would always keep its memory alive. The Emperor distributed a large sum of money to his lieutenants and provided penuries to the widows of the deceased troops. He would also adopt the children of the fallen on his own. Soldiers, it will be enough for one of you to say, "I was at the Battle of Austerlitz," for all your fellow citizens to exclaim, "There is a brave man." Thanks for watching our mini-series covering the War of the Third Coalition. To support our work, you can give us a thumbs up and share the video. See you next time.